At first, I hate saying we told you so, but the impending rise in electricity costs was so predictable. You simply cannot take the pivotal baseload energy generation systems offline and think there's going to be no long-term consequences for it. Immediately, of course, we're all going to be thinking about the hit to our hip pockets. Times are already tight and household budgets are strained. And this, quite frankly, could push some families over the financial edge. Oh, but before you panic, don't fret too much, you see. The government is compensating people for their lousy power policies using more borrowed money. That's frankly like putting a Band-Aid on a broken arm. It's not going to fix the problem. But there are much broader ramifications, you see, because the electricity hit is actually going to smash businesses too. In South Australia, for example, business is expecting a 30% rise in electricity costs from the 1st of July. Now, those businesses that can pass it on, make no mistake, will do so. Those that can't, well, they may have to close their doors. Either way, it means higher prices for you and a likely loss of jobs for Australians. And just as well, we're bringing in another 1 million migrant workers these next few years, isn't it? This is going to impact every single part of the economy. Just think about it for a second. I'll give you one example. I stayed in a hotel this past week. Now, the air conditioner was on almost all day, every day of that stay. That hotel is going to have to get that expense back when electricity prices go up, and so the hotel will jack prices up too. And it's going to be the same in every factory, every office, every retail outlet. They're all going to be in the same mire. I mean, cold store facilities, they're going to be smashed, and so will food processors and supermarkets, and that's all going to hit your bottom line. And what about those electrified train and light rail networks? I mean, obviously, there are going to be some extra transport costs coming your way. At this rate, maybe those of you who have a Tesla should start thinking about trading it in for a trusty V8 in order to save some money. There will be no escape because our society is entirely dependent on electricity, and the government knows this. And that's why they appealed to you all by promising to cut your costs, or electricity costs I should say, by $275. But instead of honouring that campaign promise, they're now ratcheting up the price of electricity, while claiming it would have been worse without their policies. All right, if you accept that reasoning, then you're part of the problem too, I've got to tell you. There are so many people that simply accept the spin and misinformation of government, and that's how we got into the societal mess we're in right now. You see, the elites have been trying to re-engineer civil society to create some imagined utopia. And utopia, actually, it really means unachievable. It's defined as, quote, an ideal commonwealth whose inhabitants exist under seemingly perfect conditions. Hence, utopian and utopianism are words used to denote visionary reform that tends to be impossibly idealistic. The key there is impossibly idealistic. That's what our leaders have in mind. An impossibly idealistic vision of the future where they can rule over us while creating a society that essentially surrenders human spirit, creativity and human nature to a zombified version of humanity. Officially, the plan is known as the Great Reset and includes things like 15-minute cities, eating insects for protein, limiting travel and owning nothing, all with the promise, of course, that you're going to be happy. Well, it's absolute bunkum, but believe me, the process is well underway. Take, for example, the moves in France this week. The French government has banned short-haul flights where the journey could be undertaken by train in less than 2.5 hours. It's all part of saving the planet from plane emissions, although there's actually no calculation of how this move will save the planet or impact the temperature whatsoever. It's also not known how it will impact the legions of elites who take their private jets to places like Davos in order to talk about climate change. We'll be sure to watch that next meeting with interest. And whether this is reasonable or not, it's going to depend on your perspective. However, to me, it's the principle that's important. You see, the next move is likely to be an extension of the bans to flights of less than 3 hours or 4 or 5. But of course, it will never be enough. It will never, ever be enough for the zealots. Eventually, they're going to want restrictions on flying right across the board, all in the name of climate change, of course. but it's part of the plan. It's part of a plan to keep us corralled like cattle in our own little wedge of the world. That's the 15-minute cities I mentioned earlier. But don't worry. There are other plans as well, which are going to allow us to numb our minds with decriminalised drugs, and we'll be able to thank the elites for the weekly allowance of the central bank digital currency. Yep, just like the failed electricity promises. This is all so predictable. It's hiding in plain sight. In essence, the West is busy hastening its own demise. While we prance around with rainbows and pronouns, while chasing the mirage of net zero, our competitors are actually laughing at us. Carbon dioxide emissions in China soared to record levels in the first quarter of this year. That's a 4% year-over-year increase relative to the same period in 2022. And that exceeded the previous peak in the first 3 months of 2021. Do you get it? While we're shutting down coal plants, China last year approved the equivalent of 2 new ones every single week. This makes a mockery of our own continuing efforts of economic strangulation. And China's President Xi, he knows how foolish we are. He said as much in an important, but I have to say largely ignored speech this week, where he detailed a new cooperation with Russia and other like-minded countries. Here's a little bit of it.
Мы готовы совместно с единомышленниками по ОПОП и государствами-членами Евразийского экономического союза под знаменем мира, развития, сотрудничества и взаимного выигрыша делиться возможностями, вместе преодолевать трудности, открывать новые горизонты во имя прогресса и цивилизаций формирующегося многополярного мира.
Okay, I don't think you can make it plainer than that. The Chinese are prepared to cooperate with like-minded people, i.e. Russia, to share opportunities, overcome difficulties, open new horizons and progress of civilization in an emerging multipolar world. Right, that's a direct rebuke of the unipolar world that the disintegrating United States has liked to dominate and has dominated for decades now. And Russian President Vladimir Putin, he warned of the West's demise some time ago, suggesting that a global change was on the way. He outlined what some of those common aims are, but he also talked very frankly about some of the errors of the West. Have a look at this.
Some people in the West believe that an aggressive elimination of entire pages from their own history reverse discrimination against the majority of the interests of a minority and the demand to give up the traditional notions of mother, father, family, and even gender. They believe that all of these are the mileposts on the path towards social renewal.
Okay, the entire speech is 7 minutes long, but I've got to tell you, it makes for fascinating watching. And I know some might dismiss it as propaganda from the nasty Ruskies, but to me, there's more truth in that 7 minutes than we're going to get in, say, a year of their ABC. I strongly suggest you watch it in its entirety. Trust me, the global realignment is actually taking shape. And thanks to the paucity of leadership in the West, we're now the ones that are being left behind.